The Trapper was the first killer ever added to Dead by Daylight. He was the only killer in the betas and was one of the original 3 killers at launch. Since then, Trapper has become Dead by Daylight's poster boy. His face is plastered all over their website, their merch, and even the intro cutscene to the game. This all ends up being a little ironic because, as of right now, the Trapper is one of the weakest killers in the game. Trapper has the 5th lowest kill rate within all MMRs and the lowest kill rate within the top 5% of Dead by Daylight players. Even ignoring the kill rate stats, which can always be taken at face value, he is generally regarded as one of the weakest killers among many Dead by Daylight players. What's uniquely concerning about Trapper is that, as opposed to other weak killers who've had minimal changes since their release, he has received various straight buffs to his kit. This is concerning because despite these buffs, he still remains relatively weak among the roster of killers. To me, this shows that the Trapper can't just be fixed by buffing the numbers of his current kit. I think the Trapper needs some slight changes to his current power in order to become a killer that isn't considered weak. This is how I would fix the Trapper. Before I go over what changes I'd make to Trapper, I'd first like to go over what exactly is wrong with the Trapper's current power and why it's so weak despite his buffs. With these problems in mind, we can hopefully think of changes that will address his flaws. To me, his 2 main problems are the unfulfilling cost and return of placing traps and the tedious task of retrieving traps. First, I'll explain his first problem, the unfulfilling cost and return of placing traps. What do I mean by this? Simply put, placing traps in most situations isn't even worth it. Let me explain. Placing traps takes time, and in Dead by Daylight, every second counts. With how much you have to go out of your way to set up traps as Trapper, you'd expect a good return. But unfortunately, most of the time this isn't the case. If you place traps that block windows and pallets for chases, chances are survivors will find them well before you run into them. If you place traps in places that the survivors won't expect, there's a good chance they'll never even come across them. And if they do, if they're paying attention, they'll just disarm them. In all of these cases, you've wasted a lot of your time to waste a few seconds of one of the 4 survivors' times. Survivors have to be getting caught in your traps semi-frequently in order for them to be worth it, and against decent survivors, this isn't the case most of the time. To add to the unfulfilling return problem, if a survivor does get caught in a bear trap but they're on the other side of the map, they'll just break free before you even get the chance to capitalize on it. This is made even worse if the survivor was already injured when they got caught. If they were healthy, they would at least lose a health state, but if they're injured, they leave the trap the same as they entered, leaving the Trapper with nothing but a disarmed trap and a survivor who's wasted a couple of seconds. Now I'll explain his other main problem, the tedious task of retrieving traps. In order for the Trapper to reload his traps, he has to manually retrieve them. This is a huge time sink for something that every other killer with objects doesn't have to deal with. Most killers with objects either reload at locker or just start off with all their objects. Trapper doesn't even have a mobility power to help with this task, so if he wants to retrieve a trap, he just has to start walking. This is especially punishing on large maps. This problem also feeds into the first problem mentioned, the cost of placing traps. So after looking at his main problems, we can see that in order to fix Trapper, we can start by making traps easier to place, make them more worthwhile if they catch a survivor, and make retrieving them more easy and less tedious. Here are some changes I have in mind that I hope will remedy these problems. My first change would be involving how Trapper places his traps. Instead of getting stuck in an animation and placing traps at his feet, I'd make it so that the Trapper can toss traps on the ground within a short range. The traps would set themselves after a few seconds after landing on the ground. This change would make it easier for the Trapper to set his traps. He would be able to place them while continuing to move. The delay in the traps getting set will also stop the traps being thrown at survivors' feet into downing them. This would also make traps much easier to use in chase as well. With how easy the traps will be able to be placed, even if the survivors disarmed them, they'll be wasting time while you barely wasted any. Secondly, to make traps just a little more worthwhile if they catch a survivor, I'll slightly change what happens if an injured survivor gets caught. If a healthy survivor gets caught, the traps will work virtually the same as they do now. But if an injured survivor gets captured, the time it takes for them to free themselves or get freed will be considerably longer. This would give the Trapper even more time to get to the caught survivor, but would also be an avoidable situation if the survivor is just healed. This way the Trapper doesn't get nothing if an injured survivor gets trapped across the map. Finally, I'd give the Trapper a new way to retrieve his traps. While I'll still be able to instantly pick up traps at his feet, I'd also give him the ability to retrieve any trap on the map. To do this, the Trapper will have the ability to hold the control button for 3 seconds while looking at the aura of the trap he wants. During these 3 seconds, the Trapper's movement speed will be reduced. The retrieve power will have a 30-second cooldown to ensure the Trapper doesn't just retrieve all his traps and trap some poor Jake in the basement. This change will hopefully make it easier for the Trapper to get traps that are miles away while still allowing him to manually pick up traps. That concludes all the changes I'd make to Trapper in an effort to make him a bit stronger. Hopefully these changes would allow him to keep up with the other killers. If you have any changes you'd make yourself, you can leave a comment. If you've made it this far, I'd like to thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, you may like to watch some of my previous videos or subscribe to see any new videos I make. That's all for now. Thank you, and goodbye.